Now, the RX 9060 XT from AMD has a bit of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing happening right now, in that there are two separate configurations that are varying wildly in terms of both performance and popularity. Obviously, I'm talking about the 16GB variant that we're going to be reviewing today, and the 8GB variant that has not reviewed nor sold very well at all. Now, I'm not saying there's anything intrinsically wrong with an 8GB GPU, so long as it's being marketed honestly to its correct demographics. Esports gamers and low to medium 1080p gamers, this is a great card for. My issue comes when you have two separate hardware configurations sharing a nomenclature. At best, that's just kind of scummy, and at worst, it's downright predatory. We saw the same thing out of the 5060 Ti with its 8 and 16GB variants. Now, before you say, oh, it's just memory allocation, I think we all remember the 4080 12GB well enough to know what these manufacturers will do if we let them get away with it. Now, while that needed to be said, I don't want it to mar what's going to be a largely positive review of a very performant graphics card. Today, we're taking a look at the XFX SWIFT RX 9060 XT. This has been a Brillo pad of a GPU. I've loved gaming on it and benching on it and overclocking on it. As you see, this is a wildly overcooled solution for an entry-level GPU leveraging only one 8-pin power connector. This 3-fan solution comes in at 11.4 inches long by 4.9 inches tall by 1.9 inches thick. It is an overcooled beast. We have a nice flow through here. The last fan, it is only a plastic backplate. Given that it's $30 over MSRP, I kind of wish we had some premium touches, a metal backplate, maybe an extra port, because it only comes with two DisplayPort 2.1s and one HDMI 2.1. But what we don't get in additional features, we do get in just raw performance, because out of the box, overclocks for this card are really aggressive. 6% over boost at 3320 and 9.8% over reference at 2780 game clock. These are really aggressive numbers, and it shows in performance, and we can manually overclock it even further, as we'll see later on. In terms of hardware specifications, we have 2048 stream processors, 32 compute units, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 on a 128-bit bus. In this review, we're doing a direct comparative against a max stable overclocked RTX 5060, and this is going to be undervolted and overclocked as fast and as stable as I possibly can, like hitting that nice balance. We'll see here in just a minute what we got, but it has been a great experience. Why don't we just go ahead and get into those configurations and into those benchmarks. All right, as I wrestle with Adrenaline software here, I might as well tell you what I added to the RTX 5060. I was able to add an additional 275 megahertz to core clock and an additional 1800 megahertz to that GDDR7. Man, that likes to stretch its legs. As you see here, I unlocked the power limit now that we're in performance and tuning, getting us an additional 10% wattage. If we go down here into max frequency, I was able to get an additional 250 megahertz to core clock, all while getting an 80 millivolt undervolt. I was really just staggered to see I was able to get such an aggressive overclock and undervolt. And memory, I was able to get 200 megahertz using default timings, fast timings, crashed out everything. Pretty conservative overclock there. So 250 on core, 200 on memory, all while getting an 80 millivolt undervolt. All right, specs and impressions are all well and good, but let's see if this card actually has what it takes to keep up with your backlog and your bedtime as we get into synthetics. As previously stated, this is going to be a direct comparative against a max stable overclocked RTX 5060, and this is going to be the only data set we have with out-of-the-box stock scores as well as overclock scores for that 9060 XT. All in-game benchmarks are going to be overclocked. Let's kick things off with Firestrike Extreme, the DirectX 11 1440p. We see a 6.5% increase in performance up to that score of 19,734, and we lead the RTX 5060 by 7.1% in its score of 18,419. Moving over to Time Spy, we see an increase in performance of 6.6% up to that score of 17,640, and we lead the RTX 5060 by a whopping 18.5% in its score of 14,880. For Royal, the lead continues. This is a ray tracing test. We see an increase in performance of 7.9% up to that score of 10,506, and we lead the RTX 5060 by 11.9% in its score of 9392. Speedway, we see a shakeup. We see an increase in performance of 13.9% to that score of 3405, but we trail the RTX 5060 by 9%. Wrapping things up with Steel Nomad, we see an increase in performance of 6.7% up to that score of 4048, and we lead the RTX 5060 by 18.1%. So kind of a shellacking with that one Speedway variance. DirectX 12 Ultimate not playing super well with the 9060 XT, but these are synthetic benchmarks. We all know what's really important. That's in-game, and we're going to kick things off with Stellar Blade. Ladies and gentlemen, 1080p and 1440p benchmarks we have for you. Starting things off at 1080p, we see a 9.9% lead for the 9060 XT, and it's 108 frames per second over the 98.3, and 1% lows are much tighter, 93 versus 67.1. 1440p, the trend continues and even extends. We see a lead of 35.7% with that 92.6 versus 68.2. This is VRAM. We've discussed this in the 5060 review. 1440p, the 5060 is not really a capable card, but so far, at least out of the gate, it looks like the 9060 XT could be. Let's move on over to Assassin's Creed Shadows, and we see a 24% increase over the 5060 from the 9060 XT. That's 66.3 versus 53.4. 1% lows are nice and tidy at 57.7. The lead percentage dwindles down to 17.5% at 1440p, but that 50.9 versus 43.3 is definitely a lot more playable there. As previously stated, this is going to be high settings, which incorporates a medium ray tracing for these cards. Neither one of these are ray tracing behemoths, so yeah, keep that in mind. But moving on over to Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, we see a 1%. It's pretty marginal, 81.1 versus 80.2, but the 1% are a little bit tighter there for the RX 9060 XT. Moving over to 1440p, however, we see a pretty substantial swing up to 16.2% at 57.2 versus 49.2, and then the 1%, those are pretty damning out of the 5060. Nobody's really surprised there with that 8 gigabytes of VRAM. This is a software-based Lumen that we're seeing here for the ray tracing. We didn't go hardware on it. We're kind of taking it easy on these entry-level cards. Moving over to Atomfall, things are a lot more competitive. They're just super weird. We trail the RTX 5060 at 1080p to the tune of 4.7%. Its score of 190.3 frames per second, but our 1% lows are a lot tighter, 106.1 versus 47.7. And then we take back the lead at 1440p to the tune of 6.1%, 138.1 versus 130.1, and 1% remain a lot tighter there on that 16 gigabyte graphics card. Heading on over to south of midnight, we see a 43.7% lead at 1080p for the 9060 XT, 114.4 with 67.3 and the 1% low. So not really tidy there, but 79.6 and 42.1 out of that 5060. Moving over to 1440p, we lead by 25.4% and that score of 84.4 versus 67.3. Both of these are playable for this title. This is not just a really demanding title, but yeah, we see a pretty commanding lead out of the 9060 XT. Let's head on over to Monster Hunter Wilds, and we see a 21.7% lead for the 9060 XT at 1080p, 84.1 versus 69.1. 1% lows are much tighter there. 1440p, the wheels fall off. We maintain our average rate lead to the tune of actually 32%, 58.9 versus 44.6, but those 1% lows are ugly, 22.2 and 11.4. Not really recommended. I would 100% upscale either of these if you're going to play at 1440p. All right, heading on over to Kingdom Come Deliverance, we see a 4.6% lead for the 9060 XT, pretty marginal, and honestly, the 1% are a little bit tighter there for the 5060 at 1080p. Wheels kind of fall off again at 1440p. We see a 24% lead for the 9060 XT over the 5060, 61.9 versus 49.7, and 1% lows kind of fall off there for the 5060. All right, getting into Doom the Dark Ages here, we see a 16.7% lead for the RX 9060 XT, 81 frames per second solid versus 69.4. So the 5060 is above 60 frames, and the 1% lows are nice and tight there. But as we see, 1440p is a 138.5% lead for the 9060 XT. So tell me VRAM doesn't matter. 56.8 versus 23.8, 44.3. They're okay 1%'s there. Heading on over to first Berserker Khazan, it is much more competitive at both resolutions. 161.7 versus 161.9. That is a 0.1%. This is margin of error, and then it's essentially the same. 109.8 against 111.3. That is a 1.4% lead for the 9060. NVIDIA does really good in first Berserker Khazan. All right, closing out our benchmarks here with Clair Obscure Expedition 33. It's kind of an encapsulation of the whole experience here. We have a 34% lead for the 9060 XT, 77.5 versus 57.8, and it gets even worse at 1440p. See an embarrassing 102.6% lead for the 9060 XT over the 5060, 53.9 versus 26.6, and that 1.9 frame per second. And it really accentuates the point that I was trying to make earlier, is if you want any kind of meaningful 1440p performance out of an entry-level card, this generation 9060 XT 16GB is really the only game in town. You can take a flyer on an Arc B580. It's got 12 gigabytes, but its performance just varies so wildly from title to title that it makes it difficult for me to recommend. And it's difficult to say because I really want to see Intel succeed in the GPU space. I'll have some elaborations there at the end in our final thoughts, but let's close everything out with a little power draw and thermals. We've got some Stellar Blade 1440p, 3 hours into just some solid gaming here. But as we can see, our temperatures remain really cool at 54, 55 degrees Celsius, and that super hot GDDR6 when overclocked is just kind of capping out at around 84, 85 degrees Celsius. That's really, really impressive. Power draw varies a little more wildly, toggle anywhere from 170 to like 185. It's just all over the place. It never really hit any one stable number where it's stuck, but performance, as you can see, is really, really good despite everything that's kind of happening in the background. But let's just wrap everything up with final thoughts. All right, bringing it all home, what do we really think here? So if we were to just look at the performance metrics, it would be a top to bottom, just domination of the 5060 by the 9060 XT here. There's an inherent price difference that we really have to take into consideration, especially at the 60 class, entry-level gaming, every single dollar counts. At MSRP, there is a 16% price difference between the $299 of the 5060 and the $349 of the 16 gigabyte variants of the 9060 XT. Now, neither of these cards were MSRP cards. I used the Gigabyte Eagle 5060, that was $319. This came in at $379, so that is a 19% differential between those two cards. That's effectively your price field of play, 15 to 20%, and that's not insubstantial, especially at the 60 class. Now, if we're only talking 1080p, there is a very competitive discussion between these, because in the 10 game average we have, this card only led by 15% over the 5060, and that doesn't justify the price difference. We are behind by 1%. Now, at that point, if you were just going to game at 5060, you know, medium high settings, you know, you're leveraging that DLSS to get some of those sweet frames. DLSS 4 is a beautiful technology. I'd have no qualms with you going to 5060 over the 9060 XT. Performance is going to be pretty similar at 1080p, so if you want to save the money, they're going to be very competitive there, but they won't hit the 1440p performance, and that is what makes this card exceptional. At that 16 to 19%, 15 to 20% differential, we had a 40% lead at 1440p out of this card. The 5060 and its 8 gigabytes of VRAM are not 1440p capable, and I know we had some spikes there of 100%, 138%. That just further accentuates the point that if you want in at that 1440p gaming, as these monitors are just coming down, and I feel like it is the first real step up going into 1440p gaming. It's a whole new visual fidelity world, and I love it. And the fact that you can get in, the price of admission is $350 to $380. I don't think that's a bad deal. I really heartily recommend this GPU if you want to go into 1440p gaming. I would say the 5060 Ti probably outperforms this marginally. You're talking about a $70 to $120 differential between these there, and that's not insubstantial either. So yeah, it's a great card. I really, really enjoyed it. The XFX card especially, it was very, very performant. Like thermally speaking, I was able to get a mean, aggressive overclock with Undervolt on it, and the thermals and power draw were never out of control. So just solid card here. If you want to get into 1080p and eventually leverage yourself into 1440p, or if you just want to see what 1440p is like, this is the recommendation, because it comes in swinging. The technologies, that's like kind of the final dividing thing. Is previously you would say, okay, this is a better rasterized performer, but NVIDIA's drivers are still rock solid. They've been making strides as we were able to overclock that 5060, but they don't have it. Like, they don't have that chair to stand on anymore. They don't, because this generation, the RDNA, like the Radeon Adrenaline software, has just been better, and the NVIDIA app is just like, it's a resource suck. It's inefficient. Like, people are clamoring to get GeForce experience back, and where are we at in the world where people want GeForce experience back? Not a world I want to live in. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I really think this is a great GPU at its price point, especially with the stack where it is now. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you stayed this long, please consider giving my channel a subscription, liking the video. It's really huge to me. I'm trying like heck to get to that 1,000 subscribers, and it would mean the world to me to have your support. So yeah, any questions at all, you want to talk, I would love to see you in the comments. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate you guys watching. You're a really incredible community. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one.